My name is Connie, and at 28 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. 3 years ago, I stood in my childhood bedroom, staring at the pristine white wedding dress that would become a symbol of the most humiliating day of my life. The dress cost $25,000 custom made by Vera Wang herself. 300 guests filled St. Augustine Church in Boston that October morning. I never imagined my groom would destroy everything right at the altar. Before I begin this story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever faced betrayal or know someone who has. This isn't just about revenge. It's about how one moment of public humiliation became the catalyst for the greatest transformation of my life. Stay with me, because what Marcus did at that altar was just the beginning. 4 years before that devastating day, I met Marcus at a technology conference in San Francisco. I was there representing my law firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions. Marcus stood at the podium 32 years old, commanding the room with his presentation about his fintech startup. His confidence wasn't just attractive, it was magnetic. After his talk, I approached him with a question about regulatory compliance. He smiled, handed me his business card, and said he'd love to discuss it over dinner. That dinner turned into breakfast. We talked for 12 hours straight about everything from cryptocurrency regulations to our favorite hiking trails in California. Marcus had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world when he looked at me. Within 3 months, he relocated his company's legal operations to Boston, claiming it was for business expansion. We both knew it was for me. Our relationship moved fast, but it felt right. Every Tuesday, he sent flowers to my office. Not roses or typical arrangements, but unique combinations of peonies and gardenias with handwritten notes. For the woman who makes corporate law look elegant, one read. Another said, counting the hours until I see you tonight, board meeting be damned. My colleagues teased me about my tech mogul boyfriend, but I could see their envy. 6 months in, Marcus invited me to Santorini. He'd rented a private villa overlooking the caldera. On our third night there, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, he got down on one knee at the edge of the infinity pool. The ring was a 4-carat cushion cut diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched the Aegean Sea behind us. "Connie," he said, his voice shaking for the first time since I'd known him. "You've turned my algorithms into poetry. Marry me." I said yes before he finished the question. Planning our wedding became my second full-time job. We hired Alessandra Romano, Boston's most exclusive wedding planner. She'd orchestrated ceremonies for senators and celebrities. Our venue would be St. Augustine Church, where my parents had married 35 years ago. The reception at the Four Seasons overlooking Boston Harbor would feature a 10-piece orchestra, 5-course meal, and champagne flown in from France. My parents, both cardiac surgeons at Mass General, adored Marcus. Dad pulled me aside one evening and said, "Sweetheart, in 35 years of marriage, I've learned to read people. Marcus looks at you the way I still look at your mother." Mom had already started planning Sunday dinners with her future son-in-law, teaching him her secret marinara recipe that she'd never even shown me. But Marcus's family was different. His mother, Eleanor, arrived from Connecticut in her black Mercedes, wearing Chanel from head to toe, and an expression that could freeze champagne. At our engagement dinner, she looked around my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse and said, "How quaint." Marcus Darling, remember when we considered buying in this neighborhood, before we discovered Greenwich, of course. She examined me like I was a business acquisition. "A lawyer," she said, swirling her wine. "How modern. Though I suppose someone needs to understand all those tedious contracts Marcus signs." When I mentioned I'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, she merely raised an eyebrow. "Yes, they do let everyone in these days, don't they?" Marcus's sister, Sophia, seemed warmer at first. 26 years old, working in fashion PR, she hugged me and squealed about wedding dress shopping. But I caught her exchanging looks with Eleanor when she thought I wasn't watching. Once I overheard her on the phone saying, "Don't worry, Mom. Marcus knows what he's doing. He always has a plan." 2 weeks before the wedding, things shifted. Marcus started having late-night conference calls with his legal team. When I asked if everything was okay with the company, he kissed my forehead and said, "Just some investor negotiations. Nothing that will interfere with our honeymoon in Bora Bora." But he'd stopped sending his Tuesday flowers. He was distracted during dinner, checking his phone constantly. One night, I woke at 3 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty. I found him in his home office documents spread across his desk, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. "The timeline has to be perfect," he said. "Everything depends on the execution." When he saw me, he quickly ended the call. "Wedding jitters," he explained, pulling me onto his lap. "I want everything to be perfect for you." Sophia started visiting more frequently, always wanting to discuss wedding details when Marcus was around. They'd step aside for private conversations, their heads bent together. When I approached, they'd separate quickly, Sophia launching into questions about flower arrangements or seating charts. Once I saw her hand Marcus an envelope that he quickly tucked into his jacket. My best friend Jennifer, who'd known me since our undergraduate days at Yale, pulled me aside at my bachelorette party. "Connie, is everything okay? You seem tense." I brushed off her concerns, attributing my anxiety to typical pre-wedding stress. 300 guests, a $25,000 dress, coordinating families from different social spheres. It would make anyone nervous, right? The morning of October 15th arrived crisp and bright, the kind of New England fall day that photographers dream about. Golden leaves danced outside my suite at the Four Seasons, as my 6 bridesmaids helped me prepare. My hair was swept into an elegant chignon adorned with my grandmother's pearl clips. The makeup artist had created a look she called ethereal elegance, and for once I felt worthy of the description. As the hairstylist placed the cathedral-length veil, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You don't know who you're marrying. Get out now." My cousin Lisa saw my face pale. "What's wrong?" I showed her the message. "Just some jealous ex," she said, deleting it. "Ignore the haters. Today is your day." The limousine ride to St. Augustine took 15 minutes that felt like hours. My father held my hand, his surgical steady hand surprisingly trembling. "My little girl," he kept repeating. "I can't believe my little girl is getting married." Outside the church, photographers captured every angle as I stepped out, the October breeze catching my veil like something from a fairy tale. Inside the bridal suite, my mother made final adjustments to my dress. The Vera Wang creation was everything I dreamed about. Ivory silk, with hand-sewn crystal, beading a sweetheart neckline, and a train that seemed to float behind me. "You're radiant," Mom whispered, tears threatening her mascara. "Marcus is the luckiest man alive." The wedding coordinator knocked. "5 minutes, Miss Connie." My bridesmaids lined up bouquets of white roses, and baby's breath trembling slightly in their hands. The orchestra began the processional music. Each bridesmaid walked down the aisle to Pachelbel's canon, their lavender dresses catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Then came my moment. The massive oak doors opened, revealing 300 guests rising to their feet. The church was transformed with thousands of white roses and orchids candles flickering on every surface. At the altar, Marcus stood in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his groomsmen flanking him like a corporate board meeting. But something was wrong. His face wasn't showing the joy I expected. His jaw was clenched, his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. My father walked me down the 100-foot aisle that felt like a mile. I smiled at familiar faces, my law school professors, Marcus's investors, childhood friends who'd flown in from across the country. Eleanor sat in the front row wearing black, an interesting choice for a wedding. Sophia beside her kept checking her phone, barely looking up as I passed. When we reached the altar, Dad lifted my veil, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Be happy, sweetheart." He placed my hand in Marcus's. It was cold, clammy. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at something beyond my shoulder. Reverend Williams began the ceremony with a prayer about eternal love and commitment. Marcus's responses were mechanical, robotic. When we reached the vows, I poured my heart out, telling him about the moment I knew he was my forever, how he'd made me believe in fairy tales again. The guests dabbed at their eyes. Marcus simply nodded, his prepared vows apparently forgotten. Then came the crucial moment. Reverend Williams spoke those fateful words. "Do you, Marcus Alexander Thompson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" The church fell silent. Marcus turned from me to face the congregation. He reached into his jacket, and for a moment I thought he might have written special vows after all. Instead, he pulled out a wireless microphone. The wedding coordinator looked confused. This wasn't in the program. "I need to say something," Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "I cannot marry Connie." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. My knees buckled slightly, but I forced myself to remain standing. "She's been having an affair with my business partner, David Kim." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. David Kim. I'd met him exactly 3 times at corporate events. Never alone, never for more than 5 minutes of professional conversation. Marcus continued pulling out his phone, connecting it to the church's projection system that we'd installed for our wedding slideshow. "I have evidence." Emails appeared on the screen, intimate messages between David and someone using my email address. Photos of a woman who looked like me from behind embracing David outside a hotel. The metadata showed dates when I'd been in depositions in court places with verified alibis, but the 300 guests didn't know that. Furthermore, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength like he was delivering a startup pitch, "I've discovered that Connie has been secretly working to undermine my company, feeding information to our competitors, planning to steal my technology once we were married. She targeted me from that first conference in San Francisco. This whole relationship has been a corporate espionage scheme." My parents shot to their feet. "This is insane," my father shouted. "My daughter would never." But Marcus had prepared for this. More documents appeared on screen, forged legal papers with my signature, fake bank statements showing payments from Marcus's competitors. The production value was impressive. He'd clearly spent weeks, maybe months, orchestrating this moment. "I loved you, Connie," Marcus said, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, nothing like the man who'd proposed in Santorini. "But I cannot marry someone who betrayed me so fundamentally. I'm sorry to all our guests who came here today expecting a celebration, but I couldn't let this charade continue." The church erupted. Some guests were recording on their phones, others arguing among themselves. My law school friends looked skeptical, but Marcus's business associates were already backing away from my family's side of the church. Eleanor sat with a small, satisfied smile, like she'd just closed a successful business deal. Sophia had the decency to look uncomfortable, but she didn't speak up. I stood at the altar for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. The $1,000 bouquet shook in my hands. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to cry, to beg Marcus to tell the truth. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Not hysterically, not maniacally, but a quiet, knowing laugh. Walking to Marcus, I gently took the microphone from his hands. He stepped back, uncertain. The church fell silent again, 300 people holding their breath. "If this is what you choose," I said, my voice steady and clear, "remember this moment. Remember standing in God's house in front of our families and friends and choosing this path. Remember that you had the option of truth, of honor, of simply calling off a wedding with dignity. Remember that you chose cruelty instead." I unclipped the Harry Winston diamond necklace he'd given me as a wedding gift, placing it on the altar. Then the matching earrings. Finally, I slid off the 4-carat engagement ring, setting it down with a soft clink that echoed through the silent church. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the crowd, "I apologize for the waste of your afternoon. Please enjoy the reception at the Four Seasons. It's been paid for, and I'd hate for the food to go to waste. As for you, Marcus," I turned back to him, "I hope she was worth it." I didn't specify who she was, but the way his eyes flickered to Rachel, my paralegal sitting in the 5th row, told me everything I needed to know. Without another word, I gathered my train and walked back down the aisle. Not running, not crying, just walking with my head high while 300 people watched in stunned silence. 2 days later, I sat in Jennifer's Back Bay apartment, still wearing the yoga pants and Harvard Law sweatshirt I'd changed into after leaving the church. I hadn't cried yet. The tears felt frozen somewhere deep inside, replaced by a cold, calculating anger that reminded me why I'd become a lawyer in the first place. Jennifer, brilliant Jennifer, with her MIT computer science degree and her talent for finding information that didn't want to be found, sat across from me with her laptop. "Connie, we need to find out what really happened," she said, cracking her knuckles. "This was too orchestrated, too planned. Marcus isn't smart enough to pull this off alone." She was right. Marcus was intelligent, but this had the fingerprints of multiple conspirators. "Can you get into his email?" I asked. I know his passwords. He never changed them after I set up his encrypted folders. Within an hour, Jennifer had accessed not just his email, but his entire digital footprint. Cloud storage deleted messages, even the hidden folders he thought were secure. What we found made my stomach turn. The conspiracy started 6 months ago, right after our engagement party. Marcus had been gambling through offshore sites betting huge sums on cryptocurrency futures. He'd lost everything $2 million of investor money that he'd illegally diverted from the company accounts. The emails showed his growing panic, his desperate attempts to win it back, only to sink deeper into debt. That's when Eleanor entered the picture. His mother, it turned out, had connections to the people Marcus owed money to. Not mob connections, nothing that dramatic, but financial sharks who operated in legal gray areas. She'd negotiated a deal. Marcus would marry me, gain access to my trust fund from my grandparents, a modest $5 million that I'd never touched, then divorce me within a year claiming infidelity. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed, which I'd thought protected both of us, had a clause about infidelity that would leave me with nothing and him with everything. But the plan went deeper. Sophia's emails revealed she'd been feeding information to Rachel, my paralegal, for months. Rachel, 24 years old, ambitious, and apparently in love with Marcus since she'd first seen him at our office Christmas party. The photos on the projection screen, Rachel in a wig photographed from behind. The emails created using sophisticated spoofing software that Marcus's tech team had developed. The most damaging discovery came from Marcus's communication with potential buyers for his company. He'd been negotiating a sale to a Chinese firm violating numerous international trade regulations and the terms of his investor agreements. The documentation included forged signatures, mine included, that would have implicated me in the illegal sale. If the wedding had happened, I would have been legally tied to his crimes. "This is insane," Jennifer muttered, screenshotting everything. "He wasn't just planning to humiliate you. He was setting you up to take the fall for his illegal activities." David Kim answered my call on the first ring. "Connie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I'm so sorry about what happened at the church. Those accusations were complete fabrications." "I know, David, but I need your help. Marcus has been using both of us." We met at a small cafe in Cambridge, away from anywhere Marcus's circle might frequent. David looked older than his 40 years, stress etched into his face. As Marcus's former business partner, he'd been forced out of the company a year ago under suspicious circumstances. Marcus had accused him of embezzlement, destroyed his reputation, but never pressed formal charges. Now we knew why. It had all been projection. "I kept copies of everything," David said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Every transaction, every meeting, recording every shady deal Marcus made while I was still with the company. I knew someday someone would need this. I just never imagined it would be you." The flash drive contained financial records showing Marcus's pattern of fraud going back 3 years. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands tax evasion through cryptocurrency manipulation, and most damning evidence that he'd stolen proprietary technology from a competitor and claimed it as his own innovation. That evening, I called Michael Torres, a law school classmate who'd become one of Boston's most successful criminal prosecutors. We'd dated briefly during our second year before realizing we were better as friends than lovers. He came over, immediately reviewed the evidence, and whistled low. "Connie, this is enough to put Marcus away for 20 years minimum. Federal charges for wire fraud, tax evasion, violation of international trade agreements, and that's before we get to the defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress from the wedding." "I don't just want him in prison," I said. "I want everyone to know exactly who Marcus Thompson really is." Michael smiled, the same sharp grin he used in court. "Then you need Sarah Chen." Sarah Chen, and yes, I know the irony of the name, but she'd married into it. From her maiden name, Williams, was a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist at the Washington Post. She'd exposed corruption in 3 major corporations and 2 government agencies. When I called her with the story, she was on a plane to Boston within 4 hours. We met in my actual apartment, the one I'd thankfully never given up, despite Marcus insisting we move in together before the wedding. Sarah reviewed everything with the thoroughness that had made her famous. "This is huge," she said, "but we need more. We need the human element, the other victims." And there were other victims. Jennifer's deep dive found 3 other women Marcus had relationships with before me, not for love, but for access. One was the daughter of a patent attorney who'd mysteriously ruled in Marcus's favor during a crucial lawsuit. Another was connected to a senator who'd pushed through legislation favorable to Marcus's company. The third was married to Marcus's main competitor, and during their affair, Marcus had stolen crucial trade secrets. All 3 women agreed to speak with Sarah on condition of anonymity. Their stories painted a picture of a serial manipulator who used romance as a corporate strategy. The wedding humiliation wasn't just cruel, it was his signature move. He'd publicly destroyed 2 of the other women as well, though not as dramatically as my wedding spectacle. While Sarah worked on the media angle, I assembled my legal team. Beyond Michael on this criminal side, I brought in 3 civil attorneys specializing in defamation, financial fraud, and corporate law. We filed lawsuits on multiple fronts, moving quickly before Marcus could hide assets or flee the country. The FBI became interested when we presented evidence of the international trade violations. Agent Patricia Morse, a no-nonsense woman who reminded me of my grandmother, took over the federal investigation. "Miss Connie," she said, "what Mr. Thompson did to you personally was reprehensible. What he did to his investors and the United States trade regulations is criminal. We'll handle it from here." But I wasn't content to let the FBI handle everything. This required a more complete destruction. The counterattack required precision timing. Every element had to align perfectly, like a legal symphony, where one wrong note could collapse the entire performance. Jennifer coordinated the technical aspects from her apartment, 3 laptops running simultaneously as she prepared to deploy our evidence across multiple platforms. David worked his network, reaching out to every investor and board member who'd ever questioned Marcus's methods. Sarah's investigation uncovered something we hadn't expected. Marcus's gambling debts weren't just from bad cryptocurrency bets. He'd been funding an entirely separate life in Miami, a luxury condo under a shell company name, a 28-foot yacht registered in the Bahamas, and most surprisingly, a woman named Anastasia, who thought she was engaged to a tech entrepreneur named Mark Thompson. She'd been wearing a 3-carat engagement ring for 6 months while I was planning our wedding. When Sarah contacted Anastasia, the woman broke down. She'd given Marcus her entire inheritance, nearly $800,000, to invest in his company. The money had vanished into his gambling debts. She agreed to fly to Boston immediately, bringing every document, every text message, every piece of evidence from their relationship. Rachel, my former paralegal, reached out through an intermediary. She wanted to meet. We sat in my office after hours, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Rachel looked smaller than I remembered, her designer clothes replaced with a simple sweater and jeans. "I know you hate me," she started. "I don't hate you," I replied truthfully. "You're just another person Marcus manipulated." The tears started then. Rachel confessed everything. The affair had begun 3 months before the wedding. Marcus had pursued her aggressively, showering her with gifts and promises. He'd convinced her that I was cold, calculating, that our relationship was just business. He'd promised to marry her after leaving me to make her the legal director of his company. "The morning of the wedding," Rachel sobbed, "he told me it was all for show. That humiliating you publicly was necessary for his business deal. He said we'd be together after, but then he ghosted me, blocked my number, had security escort me from the building when I tried to visit his office." I recorded everything with her permission. Her testimony would be crucial for both the criminal and civil cases. But more importantly, she had screenshots of messages from Eleanor orchestrating the entire scheme. Marcus's mother had been the puppet master pulling strings I hadn't even known existed. The forensic accountant I hired, Dr. James Patterson, found the smoking gun in Marcus's financial records. He'd already started transferring money offshore, preparing to flee. But he'd made one crucial mistake. The transfers required 2 signatures, and he'd forged mine on documents dated after the wedding. It was provable fraud committed after he'd publicly accused me of deception. Sophia cracked next. Marcus's sister called me at 2 in the morning, hysterical. "Connie, I'm so sorry. Mom made me do it. She said if I didn't help, she'd cut me off completely. I have nothing without the family money, but I can't live with this anymore." I met Sophia at an all-night diner in Southie, a place where no one from our social circle would ever go. She looked terrible, eyes red from crying, her usually perfect hair unwashed. "Mom's been planning this for years," she said. "Not specifically with you, but she's been looking for the right target since Marcus started gambling. Someone with enough money to solve his problems, but not enough family power to fight back effectively." "My family has power," I pointed out. "Medical power, not financial. Mom researched everything. Your parents are surgeons respected, but not connected to the financial or legal elite. Your grandparents' trust fund was enough to be useful, but not enough that you'd have major lawyers managing it. You were perfect." She provided recordings she'd secretly made of Eleanor discussing the plan. Eleanor's voice, cold and calculating, outlined every step. The public humiliation was her idea. "It needs to be devastating enough that she won't have the emotional strength to fight back legally," Eleanor said in one recording. "Make it viral. Destroy her reputation so thoroughly that no one will believe her side." They'd underestimated me. The penultimate piece fell into place when Marcus's lead developer Kevin Park reached out. He'd discovered that Marcus was planning to sell the company's core technology to the Chinese firm before fleeing the country. The sale would not only violate federal law, but would also leave 200 employees jobless and dozens of investors bankrupt. Kevin had families to think about, his team members with mortgages and children in college. "I'll testify," Kevin said. "I'll provide all the technical evidence you need. Just promise me you'll protect my team." I promised. The final element required theatrical timing. Marcus had scheduled a press conference to announce his company's new merger, spinning the wedding disaster as a narrow escape from a corporate spy, meaning me. He'd been laying groundwork in the media, using his PR firm to plant stories about my supposed deception. The press conference would be his victory lap, cementing his narrative before my legal team could respond. But we were ready. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah's article would drop 1 hour before the press conference. Jennifer would simultaneously release all the evidence on social media, tagged with every major news outlet and financial watchdog organization. The FBI would arrive during the conference itself, arresting Marcus on live television. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my balcony looking out over the Charles River, thinking about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Naive, trusting, believing in fairy tale romance. That woman had died at the altar of St. Augustine Church. Who stood here now was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the first contact since the wedding. "Connie, we need to talk. I know you're planning something. I can make this all go away. I still love you." I deleted it without responding. The time for talking had passed when he chose public humiliation over private honesty. Tomorrow would bring his complete destruction. And unlike his theatrical cruelty, mine would be surgically precise, legally bulletproof, and absolutely devastating. The morning of Marcus's press conference dawned gray and drizzly, pathetic fallacy at its finest. I dressed carefully in my sharpest suit, the one I wore for federal court appearances. Navy blue, impeccably tailored, with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. If I was going to destroy someone, I would look professional doing it. Sarah's article went live at 9 a.m. sharp. The headline read, "Tech CEO's Wedding Day Cruelty Masks $1 million Fraud Scheme." Within minutes, it was trending. The article detailed everything: the gambling debts, the forged documents, the other women, Anastasia in Miami, the illegal technology sale to China. Sarah had worked her magic, weaving together a narrative that was both devastating and meticulously fact-checked. My phone exploded with calls: reporters, friends, distant relatives who'd been at the wedding. I ignored them all. Today wasn't about me talking. It was about Marcus finally facing consequences. Jennifer executed her part flawlessly. The evidence flooded social media, every platform simultaneously. The forged emails exposed as fraudulent. The photos revealed as staged. Rachel's confession video went viral within an hour, her tearful admission that she'd been manipulated into participating in the scheme. The recordings of Eleanor planning everything spread like wildfire through Boston's social elite. By 10 a.m., Marcus's investors were in full panic mode. The company's stock price plummeted 40% in pre-market trading. Board members released statements distancing themselves from their CEO. 3 major clients announced they were terminating their contracts effective immediately. The press conference was scheduled for 11 a.m. at the Copley Plaza Hotel. I arrived at 10:45, taking a seat in the back row. Journalists filled the room, their energy electric with the anticipation of blood in the water. Marcus's PR team huddled in the corner, frantically making phone calls, their carefully planned narrative crumbling in real time. Marcus entered at 11:05 and I barely recognized him. Gone was the confident tech mogul. His suit was wrinkled, his face haggard, his hands visibly shaking as he approached the podium. He'd aged years in the hour since Sarah's article dropped. His eyes scanned the room and locked on mine. I smiled slightly, the kind of smile a chess player gives when they say checkmate. He tried to stick to his script, talking about the merger, about future innovations, about shareholder value. But the journalists smelled blood. The first question came from the Boston Globe. "Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to the Washington Post article alleging fraud and forgery?" Marcus stammered, "Those are baseless accusations from a bitter ex." The second question from Reuters. "What about the FBI investigation into your illegal technology transfer to China?" "I'm not aware of any FBI investigation." That's when they arrived. Agent Patricia Morse walked in with 4 other federal agents, their FBI jackets unmistakable. The room erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions. Marcus stepped back from the podium, his face draining of all color. "Marcus Alexander Thompson," Agent Morse announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, violation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage." As they read him his Miranda rights, Marcus's eyes found mine again. This time I stood up, letting him see me fully. See that I wasn't broken, wasn't destroyed. I was the architect of his downfall, and I wanted him to know it. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a satisfying finality. As they led him past me, he tried to speak. "Connie, please." "Save it for your lawyer," I replied. "You'll need a good one, though probably not as good as me." The media frenzy was instantaneous. Photos of Marcus in handcuffs became the lead story on every major news outlet. The headline, "Wedding Day Villain Arrested at Own Press Conference," trended globally. The video of his arrest, with me visible in the background, calm and composed, became the most watched clip on social media that day. Eleanor's arrest came 2 hours later. The FBI picked her up at her Greenwich estate, where she'd been frantically trying to book a flight to Switzerland. Sophia, who'd been cooperating with authorities, watched from across the street as they led her mother away in handcuffs. The society matron who'd sneered at my family's quaint home would be spending the night in federal detention. Rachel's termination from her new job came swift and brutal. Once her confession video went viral, no law firm in Boston would touch her. She'd been working at a prestigious firm downtown, but they released a statement distancing themselves within hours. Her legal career, so carefully built, crumbled in an afternoon. The class action lawsuit from Marcus's investors was filed before markets closed. $200 million in damages, with my testimony as their star witness. His company's board called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO, installing Kevin Park as interim leader, with a mandate to save what remained of the company. Anastasia from Miami gave an exclusive interview to NBC that evening. Sitting in the same hotel where Marcus had proposed to her 2 weeks after proposing to me in Santorini, it turned out she detailed their relationship, the lies, the stolen money. She looked directly at the camera and said, "Connie, if you're watching, thank you. You saved me from marrying a monster." That night, I sat in my apartment with Jennifer, Michael, and Sarah. We opened a bottle of champagne that had been meant for my wedding reception. "To justice," Michael toasted. "To revenge," Jennifer corrected. "To the truth," Sarah added. "To new beginnings." I concluded, and we drank. Marcus's bail was set at $5 million, which he couldn't make. His assets were frozen, his passport confiscated. The man who'd stood at the altar in his Tom Ford tuxedo, publicly humiliating me in front of 300 guests, now sat in a federal detention center in an orange jumpsuit. The wedding photographer, who'd captured the entire altar confrontation, reached out with an interesting proposition. A documentary filmmaker wanted to use the footage to tell the story of what really happened. I agreed with one condition: all proceeds would go to a fund for women who'd been victims of financial fraud by romantic partners. Within a week, the fund had received over $2 million in donations. The transformation of my life after Marcus's arrest wasn't immediate. Trauma doesn't heal overnight, even when you've orchestrated your abuser's downfall. But something fundamental had shifted in me. The woman who'd stood at that altar humiliated and confused was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that justice wasn't given, it was taken. I returned to my law practice with a new focus. Instead of corporate mergers and acquisitions for tech companies, I specialized in protecting women in high-stakes divorces and business disputes. My first client came the day after Marcus's arrest, a software engineer whose husband had stolen her startup idea and launched it without her. We won her case in 3 months, securing not just financial compensation, but public recognition of her innovation. Word spread quickly. Within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle alone. I hired 2 associates, both women who'd faced their own battles with corporate misogyny. We took cases others wouldn't touch, the ones where David faced Goliath, where the evidence seemed stacked against us. We won 92% of them. The book offer came from Random House. When They Go Low, You Go Legal, A Guide to Strategic Justice became my project for the next year. Not a tell-all about Marcus, though he featured as a cautionary tale, but a practical guide for women facing similar situations. How to document abuse, how to build a legal case, how to survive public humiliation and emerge stronger. The book tour took me to 30 cities. At every stop, women approached with their own stories. A teacher in Phoenix whose principal had sexually harassed her, then fired her when she reported it. A surgeon in Seattle whose partner had sabotaged her career to eliminate competition. An entrepreneur in Austin whose investor had stolen her company through legal manipulation. I took notes, connected them with local attorneys, and built a network of women who refused to be victims. Harvard Law School invited me to speak at their commencement. Standing at the same podium where I'd graduated 8 years earlier, I looked out at the sea of fresh faces, eager to conquer the legal world. You'll face moments, I told them, where the law seems to protect those who least deserve it, where justice feels impossible. In those moments, remember that the law is a tool. How you wield it determines whether it becomes a weapon for oppression or a shield for the vulnerable. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. My personal life remained complicated. Trust once shattered so publicly wasn't easily rebuilt. I went to therapy twice a week with Dr. Patricia Hansford, a specialist in trauma recovery. You orchestrated a perfect legal revenge, she noted during one session. But emotional healing isn't about winning. It's about releasing the need to fight. She was right, but releasing that need took time. For months, I checked Marcus's case obsessively. His trial date was set, postponed, reset. His lawyers, paid for by mortgaging his mother's estate, tried every delay tactic possible. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had built an airtight case, and my testimony would be the final nail. I met Christopher at a charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital, 15 months after the wedding disaster. He was a cardiac surgeon like my parents, but worked primarily with pediatric cases. We were seated at the same table by coincidence, or perhaps by my mother's careful orchestration. She'd been trying to set us up for months, but I'd resisted. Christopher was everything Marcus hadn't been. Quiet where Marcus had been, flashy, thoughtful where Marcus had been impulsive. He didn't try to impress me with wealth or connections. Instead, he told me about the 9-year-old patient who'd finally gone home after 6 months in the hospital, about the new technique he was developing for infant heart repairs. "I know who you are," he said over dessert. "I followed your case. What you did took incredible courage." "It took anger," I corrected. "Maybe, but you channeled that anger into justice. That's not revenge, it's revolution." We started slowly. Coffee dates between surgeries and depositions. Walks along the Charles River discussing everything except our romantic histories. He sent flowers every Tuesday, not elaborate arrangements, but simple wildflowers with notes about medical journals he thought I'd find interesting for my cases. 6 months in, I told him everything. Not the public story, but the private humiliation. The moment at the altar when I'd wanted to dissolve into nothing. The nights I'd spent planning Marcus's destruction while crying into my pillow. The fear that I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Christopher listened without judgment, holding my hand across the restaurant table. "He tried to break you publicly because he knew he couldn't match you privately. That's not your weakness, it's his." The Marcus update came through Sarah's contacts. He'd negotiated a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentence. 15 years in federal prison with possibility of parole in 10. The financial crimes, the forgeries, the conspiracy charges all rolled into one comprehensive conviction. Eleanor got 8 years, her society connections useless in federal court. Sophia received probation and community service, her cooperation with authorities earning leniency. Rachel had moved to Portland, working as a paralegal under a different name. Her legal career was over before it began, but she'd sent me a letter of apology that seemed genuine. I didn't respond, but I didn't pursue further action against her either. Living with her choices seemed punishment enough. Marcus's company survived under Kevin's leadership, restructured and refocused on legitimate innovation. The employees kept their jobs, the investors recovered some losses, and the technology that Marcus had tried to sell illegally was properly licensed to benefit everyone. Kevin sent me a thank you card signed by the entire staff. I kept it on my office desk, a reminder that justice could be constructive, not just punitive. The wedding venue offered an interesting opportunity. St. Augustine Church reached out, embarrassed by their role in the public humiliation. They offered to host a charity event, anything I chose as a form of apology. I organized a legal clinic for domestic abuse survivors held in the same space where Marcus had tried to destroy me. 300 people attended, the same number as our wedding guest list. This time the gathering actually helped people. 2 years after the arrest, Forbes featured me in their 40 Under 40 issue. The article focused not on the wedding scandal, but on my legal practice, which had grown to 20 attorneys across 3 cities. We'd won landmark cases, set precedents for financial abuse in relationships, and recovered over $50 million for our clients. The photo shoot took place in my office, the Boston skyline behind me, Marcus's former building visible but irrelevant in the distance. Christopher proposed on a random Thursday morning over breakfast. No grand gesture, no public spectacle. Just a simple, "I want to spend my life with you," over scrambled eggs and coffee. The ring was his grandmother's, a modest sapphire, that meant more than any 4-carat diamond ever could. "Yes," I said, and meant it without reservation. 5 years had passed since the altar disaster when I received the request. Marcus wanted to see me. He'd been in federal prison for 3 years with 7 more to go before possible parole. His lawyer contacted mine with the formal visitation request. My first instinct was to refuse. Christopher thought I should ignore it entirely, but Dr. Hansford had different advice. "Closure doesn't always come from avoidance," she said. "Sometimes it comes from facing the person who hurt you and realizing they have no power left." The federal correctional facility sat 2 hours outside Boston, a gray complex that seemed to leach color from the surrounding landscape. I drove myself, needing the time alone to prepare. I wore a simple black suit, professional but understated. No jewelry except my wedding ring, the sapphire Christopher had given me catching the light. The security process was extensive: forms, metal detector searches. They led me to a visiting room with reinforced glass partitions and monitored phone lines. Other visitors sat at similar stations, families visiting loved ones, lawyers consulting with clients. The normalcy of it felt surreal. Marcus entered from a door on the prisoner side, and I almost didn't recognize him. The confident tech CEO was gone entirely. His hair, once perfectly styled, had gone gray and thin. He'd lost at least 30 pounds, his orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. The designer stubble was replaced with patchy, unkempt facial hair. He looked 20 years older than his 37 years. He sat down slowly, as if movement hurt. When he picked up the phone, his hands shook. I picked up my side and waited. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think you would." "What do you want, Marcus?" He flinched at my tone, professional and distant. "I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know I'm sorry." "You're sorry you got caught?" "No," he said quickly. "Well, yes, but that's not— Connie, I destroyed everything. My life, my family, my company. But worse, I tried to destroy you. The person who loved me most in the world, and I chose to hurt you in the cruelest way possible." I studied him through the glass. Prison had stripped away his masks, his confidence, his carefully constructed image. What remained was pathetic, but possibly genuine. "Why?" I asked the question I'd never been able to answer completely. The gambling, the debts I understand. But why the public humiliation? Why not just call off the wedding? Marcus set down the phone to rub his face, then picked it back up. My mother convinced me it was the only way. That if I just canceled, you'd investigate. You'd find out about the debts and the illegal deals. But if I destroyed your credibility first, made you the villain, you'd be too humiliated to fight back. We underestimated you completely. Eleanor always hated me. She hated everyone who threatened her control. You were successful, independent. You didn't need our money. She couldn't manipulate you like she did everyone else in my life. So she decided to destroy you. And you let her. I chose to. That's the worst part. I can blame my mother, the gambling addiction, the pressure, but I made the choice. I stood at that altar, looked at you in that beautiful dress, saw your parents crying with joy, and I chose cruelty. I chose to destroy the only real thing in my life. The silence stretched between us. Around us, other conversations continued, children showing drawings to incarcerated parents, lawyers discussing appeals, normal life carrying on despite the circumstances. I heard you got married, Marcus said finally. Christopher something, a doctor, a surgeon, pediatric cardiac specialist. Good, that's good. You deserve someone authentic. I deserve that from you. He nodded, tears now flowing freely down his face. I know. I think about it every day. Every single day in here, I think about what I threw away. The life we could have had. Children. Real happiness. I threw it all away for money that's gone anyway and a mother who won't even write to me anymore. Eleanor disowned you. As soon as the money ran out. Sophia tried to visit once, but I told her not to come back. She needs to build her own life away from our toxic family. I thought about Sophia, who'd reached out 6 months ago. She was working as a receptionist at a nonprofit, living in a studio apartment, rebuilding from nothing. I'd helped her get the job through my network, though she didn't know it. Is that why you wanted to see me, to apologize? Marcus leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass. I wanted to tell you that you won. Not the court case or the public battle, but the real victory. You showed everyone who I really was, including me. You survived what I did and became stronger. You turned my cruelty into your catalyst. And maybe knowing that helps you somehow. I didn't need your permission to win, Marcus. No, you didn't. You never needed anything from me. That's what terrified my mother, and if I'm honest, what terrified me too. You were always going to eclipse me. I just tried to destroy you before you realized it. The guard signaled 5 minutes remaining. Marcus seemed to shrink further, knowing our time was ending. Can I ask you something? He said. Do you ever think about forgiving me? I considered the question. I forgave you 3 years ago, Marcus. Not for you, but for me. Carrying hatred was exhausting, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means I chose to stop letting your cruelty define my life. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. He laughed, a broken sound. Still honest. I always loved that about you. No, Marcus, you loved the idea of me. The successful lawyer wife who'd make you look good. You never loved the actual person because if you had, you couldn't have done what you did. The guard called time. Marcus stood slowly, his movements those of a much older man. Connie, be happy. Whatever else happens, be happy. I hung up the phone without responding and walked out of the visiting room. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, not crying, not angry, just processing. The man who tried to destroy me was himself destroyed. But my life hadn't been built on his destruction. It had been built despite it. The drive home was peaceful. Christopher had dinner waiting salmon with the lemon sauce I loved. We ate on our balcony, watching the sunset over the Charles River. He didn't ask about the visit immediately, letting me find my words. He's pathetic, I finally said. Broken and alone and pathetic. How does that feel? Like nothing. That's the strangest part. I expected to feel vindicated or satisfied or even sad. But I felt nothing. He's just someone I used to know who made terrible choices. Christopher reached over and took my hand. That sounds like real closure. 2 weeks later, we discovered I was pregnant. The timing felt like the universe's way of saying the past was truly past. We'd been trying for a year, going through fertility treatments, facing disappointment after disappointment. But somehow, after facing Marcus, after truly letting go, my body decided it was ready for new life. Emma was born on a snowy December morning, exactly 6 years after the wedding that wasn't. Christopher cried when he held her for the first time, this man who performed complex surgeries on infant hearts, overwhelmed by his own daughter's arrival. My parents, who'd aged gracefully through the entire ordeal, became the most devoted grandparents imaginable. The business continued to thrive. We opened offices in New York and Los Angeles, taking on cases that set national precedents. The book spawned a documentary series on Netflix, examining different cases of financial abuse in relationships. I became the legal analyst major networks called when high-profile divorces or financial scandals broke. But the real success was smaller, quieter. Sunday dinners with my parents, where Marcus's name never came up anymore. Bedtime stories with Emma, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Saturday morning runs with Christopher along the same path where I'd once planned Marcus's destruction, now planning family vacations and kindergarten applications. Sophia reached out when Emma was 6 months old. She'd gotten engaged to a social worker she'd met at her nonprofit. A small wedding, she assured me, just family and close friends. She wanted Emma to be there if I was comfortable with it. I was. The past was the past, and Sophia had found her own redemption. The invitation included a handwritten note: "You saved me too, Connie, from becoming my mother, from thinking manipulation was strength. Thank you for showing me what real power looks like." That wedding dress, the $25,000 Vera Wang creation that had witnessed my greatest humiliation, still hangs in my closet. Not in the master bedroom closet I share with Christopher, but in the guest room zipped in its pristine garment bag. I've thought about donating it, selling it, even burning it in some cathartic ritual. But I keep it. Emma discovered it last week while playing hide and seek. "Mommy, what's this pretty dress?" she asked, her 3-year-old hands reaching for the bag's zipper. "That's from a long time ago, sweetheart, before you were born." "Were you a princess?" I knelt down to her level, brushing her dark curls from her face. "No, baby. But I learned something important wearing that dress. I learned that real princesses don't need princes to save them. They save themselves. Like Elsa. Exactly like Elsa." She lost interest and ran off to find Christopher, who was pretending very badly to hide behind our couch. I stood there for a moment, hand on the garment bag, remembering the woman who'd worn it. Scared and love-trusting. I didn't hate her anymore. She'd been doing her best with what she knew then. The practice now employs 300 attorneys across 5 cities. We've recovered over $1 billion for our clients and set precedents that protect vulnerable parties in financial disputes. The Harvard Law Review published my article on Weaponized Romance When Love Becomes Corporate Strategy, which is now required reading in several law schools. Christopher and I had our second child last year, a boy we named James after my grandfather. He has Christopher's calm temperament and my stubborn streak, a combination that will serve him well. Our life is beautifully ordinary in the way I never thought I'd have after Marcus. Soccer practices, birthday parties, date nights when we can find a babysitter. The kind of life that doesn't make headlines, but makes happiness. Marcus wrote me one more time a letter that arrived through his lawyer last month. He's getting out in 4 years good behavior and prison overcrowding working in his favor. He wanted me to know he'd enrolled in counseling programs, addiction therapy, anger management. He'd gotten his MBA through the prison education program and hoped to work in nonprofit financial counseling when released, helping people avoid the mistakes he'd made. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw the letter away either. It sits in my desk drawer next to the thank you card from his former employees and Sophia's wedding invitation. Artifacts of a life that shaped but doesn't define me. The Boston Globe ran a retrospective on the 5th anniversary of the wedding scandal. They interviewed guests who'd been their experts on public humiliation psychologists about recovery from trauma. They reached out to me for comment. I gave them one sentence: "The best revenge is a life well lived, and I'm living very well." Marcus's mother, Eleanor, died in prison last year. Complications from diabetes. The paper said, though, that Sophia told me it was really despair. She'd lost everything: her money, her status, her control. The woman who'd orchestrated my humiliation died alone in a federal medical facility, no visitors in her final days. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't mourn either. She was just another casualty of her own cruelty. Rachel reached out through LinkedIn last month. She's remarried, has twins, works as a freelance writer now. Her message was brief. I see your success and I'm genuinely happy for you. We both know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that what happened changed me fundamentally. I teach my daughters about consent manipulation and standing up for what's right. Your strength in that moment taught me more than any law school class ever could. I wrote back just 2 words, good luck, because that's all she needed from me. Acknowledgement that I'd read it, that her apology was received if not accepted. We're not friends, we'll never be friends, but we're no longer enemies. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest betrayals. The speaking engagements continue. Law schools, women's conferences, corporate leadership summits. The story has evolved from one of personal revenge to one of systemic change. How to recognize manipulation, how to document abuse, how to build legal cases that protect the vulnerable. I've testified before Congress twice about financial abuse in relationships, helping draft legislation that's now law in 12 states. But the moment that stays with me, the one that defines this entire journey, happened last week at Emma's preschool. They had a wedding in the dramatic play area, children dressed in costume jewelry and old curtains. Emma was officiating, standing on a block with a picture book as her Bible. When she got to the vows, she stopped the ceremony. "Wait," she announced to her confused classmates. "First, everyone needs to know that if someone is mean to you, even at your wedding, you can leave. My mommy says you always have choices, and choosing yourself is always okay." Her teacher told me about it at pickup, tears in her eyes. "I don't know the full story, Mrs. Bennett." I'd taken Christopher's last name, leaving Marcus's completely behind. "But whatever you've taught Emma about self-respect and strength is remarkable." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me a question that stopped my heart. "Mommy, did someone be mean to you at a wedding?" I sat on the edge of her princess bed, choosing my words carefully. "Yes, sweetheart. Someone was very mean to me once. But you know what? It taught me how strong I really was. Stronger than the mean person. So much stronger." "Good," she said, satisfied. "I'm strong like you." "Yes, baby, you are." As I write this, Christopher is in surgery, saving another tiny heart. Emma and James are asleep down the hall. The city lights twinkle outside our brownstone, the same lights I stared at while planning Marcus's downfall. But I don't think about revenge anymore. I think about tomorrow's client meeting, Saturday's soccer game, the vacation we're planning to Disney World. That wedding dress still hangs in the closet, a $25,000 reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the catalyst for our greatest triumphs. Marcus tried to break me publicly, thinking humiliation was the ultimate weapon. He never understood that you can't break someone who refuses to be broken. You can't destroy someone who takes their pain and transforms it into power. I kept the dress not as a symbol of pain, but as a symbol of transformation. Every time I see it, I remember the woman who stood at that altar, humiliated and heartbroken. But more importantly, I remember the woman who walked away with her head high. The woman who chose justice over victimhood, success over suffering, love over bitterness. The woman who turned his cruelty into her crown. That wedding dress doesn't represent the day Marcus tried to destroy me. It represents the day I chose myself. The day I decided that no one's cruelty would define my worth. The day I learned that the best revenge isn't just success, it's happiness. Complete, authentic, unshakable happiness. And I have that now. Not because I destroyed Marcus, though that was satisfying, not because I found Christopher, though he's wonderful, but because I learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. It's about taking the worst moment of your life and making it the beginning of your best story. So that dress hangs there, worth more than its price tag could ever reflect. Not as a painful reminder, but as a symbol of the day I chose myself over anyone else's betrayal. The day my real story began. And what a story it's become. I often think about the guests who witnessed my humiliation at St. Augustine Church. 300 people who saw what they thought was my destruction. Many have reached out over the years, some to apologize for not defending me in the moment, others to share how my response inspired them in their own struggles. But the most meaningful message came from a young woman who'd been a server at the planned reception. I was 22, she wrote, working catering to pay for college. When news spread through the kitchen about what happened at the church, the older servers said you'd probably have a breakdown. Instead, you showed up at the reception venue, told us to serve the food anyway, and made sure everyone got paid plus tips. You even took a photo with the staff. I still have it. You were still in your wedding dress, surrounded by us in our catering uniforms, and you were smiling. Not a fake smile, but real. That photo reminds me every day that grace under pressure is the ultimate power move. That photo sits framed in my office now between my law degree and a picture of my family. A reminder that even in our worst moments, we can choose kindness. We can choose dignity. We can choose to rise. If you've ever been betrayed, humiliated, or broken by someone you trusted, I want you to know something. Your story isn't over. That moment of pain isn't your ending, it's your beginning. The person who hurt you thought they were writing your final chapter. They were wrong. They were just giving you the motivation to write your masterpiece. So tell me, where are you watching from today? Have you faced your own, Marcus? Your own public humiliation? Your own betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be destroyed by someone else's cruelty. And if you found strength in my story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they can survive their worst day and build their best life. Because that's what we do. We survive, we thrive, and we turn our scars into stars. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, when someone tries to break you publicly, you have two choices. You can break or you can build. I chose to build an empire on the ashes of what Marcus burned down. And you can too. Until next time, this is Connie reminding you that the best revenge is a life so well lived that your enemies become footnotes in your success story. Be strong, be smart, and above all, be unbreakable.